again be invited to speak at universities. Now Harvard, of course, has a petition going around saying I should be sent to a re-education camp like in communist China or the former apartheid South Africa and made to confess my sins for having defended the Constitution. So I'm not completely objective on this issue, but I believe in free speech for me and for thee, not just free speech for me, but not for thee.
So that's not the only petition, right? There's also a petition circulating around Harvard where you taught for 50 years, calling to hold anyone associated with the Trump campaign accountable or Trump at all before they could teach, attend, or speak at Harvard, which, you know, as you said, includes you as well.
Yeah.
What can you shed light on what they possibly mean by held accountable and what you make of all of this?
Well, it started out as a petition just to ban, a total ban. People like me couldn't ever come on the campus. We couldn't speak. We couldn't teach. We couldn't be a student. I don't know if it would apply to our children or grandchildren. Both of my grandchildren went to Harvard. I don't know whether it would apply to relatives, whether it would be a bill of attainder like the old bill of attainders in pre-colonial Britain, but it would be a total ban. Then when they got some pushback, they said, oh, let's compromise. Let's not make it a total ban. Let's say you have to be held accountable, you have to kind of admit your sins, or be totally banned. But the real goal is to have a total ban. There's great fear that students will be exposed to different points of view. This is from people who claim to support diversity. The last thing they want is diversity. They want more of themselves, more people who look like them, think like them, act like them. But the last thing they want are, for example, Christian conservatives or Orthodox Jewish conservatives, or Republicans, or Trump supporters, or people who strongly believe in the Second Amendment, or who believe in a right to life, or who are opposed to gay marriage on religious grounds. All of these are views I personally disagree with, but I want to hear people on campus who have every different point of view. When I used to teach my course for Harvard freshmen called Where Does Your Morality Come From? I would have 500 applicants for 15 places. I would always try to pick an assortment of students that reflected every point of view. I would always try to get one or two students who may have gone to a very religious Catholic seminary or an Orthodox Jewish yeshiva. I would want to pick an atheist and a Muslim and, you know, somebody who fundamentally disagreed with me and with the other students so that students could hear a variety of views. But these Stalinists on the campus, and that's what they are. There's no other word for them than Stalinists. They know the truth with a capital T, so there's no reason to have due process. If a person is accused, he must be guilty. If he's accused by a woman, my God, why would a woman ever lie? Men lie, women don't lie. If a man wants to make a speech that's in favor of Trump, he must be either insane or senile or a very evil and bad person. We don't have to hear those points of view. It's not the truth. So that's the attitude that today is becoming fairly dominant, not only among students, but among hard left faculty as well.
Yeah, it's really alarming. I was listening to your podcast, The Dersh Show, where you were discussing all of this. And one of the things you said, if it's, you know, starts at Harvard, it's coming to a university near you. So
there's no question about that. It's already moved to Princeton. It's going to go to Yale. It will go to the University of Chicago. It's already at Berkeley and other places. Berkeley tried to ban me a few years ago for making a two-state solution, pro-Israel, pro-Palestine speech, because I wasn't going to demonize Israel. There was an attempt to ban me and threats of violence, and I had to threaten a lawsuit to be able to speak on the Berkeley campus. That's going to happen more and more. I spoke to somebody today who works in the Trump administration, and he said he's being blackballed. People won't even, he's a brilliant guy, top of his class, you know, like the number one NBA draft choice if this were basketball, but there are law firms and companies that don't want him because he's associated with the Trump administration, and that's today radioactive for some. And it's just a return to McCarthyism. For me, it's familiar. I went to college in the 1950s, and so I remember actual McCarthyism. I remember Brooklyn College, where professors were fired because they refused to cooperate with the House Un-American Activities Committee. And I was an anti-communist, virulently anti-communist, but I defended the right of communists to teach at Brooklyn College. I wanted to hear their point of view. I wanted to hear it so I could be better educated, and my disagreement would be more thoughtful.
Do you think, it's kind of strange to ask this, but do you think our society is being sort of conditioned to totalitarianism? Because there seems to be a lack of tolerance of any diversity.
look, if AOC and her ilk become the dominant force in America, we will be moving toward totalitarianism. And these students have no problem with that, as long as they're the totalitarian leaders. They don't care. For them, due process, democracy, those are all your grandfather's virtues. For them, civil liberties is a thing of the past. Free speech is patriarchal. The First Amendment is an anachronism. It was written by slaveholders. Why should we take seriously the First Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, the separation of powers, checks and balances? All of those are processes. We don't need processes. We know the truth with a capital T. Why do you need debate? Why do you need dialogue? Why do you need due process? No, we know. Just read the Communist Manifesto. It'll tell you the truth, or whatever other manifesto they want you to read today.
So when you spent a good number of years in the halls of academia, were you confronted with this constantly, or what was that like for you?
Oh, there was a political correctness on campus. There were professors who pushed that kind of political correctness. Professor Lawrence Tribe at Harvard Law School. He doesn't need debate or due process. He knows the truth, and anybody who disagrees with him doesn't understand the Constitution. He has a totalitarian mind set, and many people on the hard left have totalitarian mindsets. They don't need discourse or dialogue. What they need is just more people supporting their point of view. So I was confronted with that, but it was a minority, and it was well disguised. Today, it's no longer disguised. Today, it's out in the open. Today, if you had anything to do with the Trump administration, you're a pariah or you're insane. I'm 82 years old, and so the ageism that I get in my tweets, I must be senile, I'm going insane, I'm too old, et cetera, et cetera. I'll challenge any of them to debate any of these issues, but that's not good enough for them, because they know if I have a point of view different from theirs, it must be a point of view that's either informed by evil or by illness.
So do you think they're just, when they're talking about, what you described as re-education camps, or some sort of re-education that's required, do you think they're just using words, or do you actually imagine they're putting people in classrooms and re-educating whatever means is required?
Well, I think the students who are behind this petition, these bullies, and remember, all you need is a small number of students, because most of the administrators don't have the courage to stand up to the loudest of students. Look, they fired a dean at Harvard, Ron Sullivan, the first black dean, and his wife of a college, got fired because he represented Harvey Weinstein for a very short period of time. And the students complained that they were afraid, they were scared, they were fearful in the presence of this mild-mannered professor. A year or two earlier, he had represented a man accused of double murder and a gangland-type killing. They weren't afraid of that, but because he represented Harvey Weinstein, that put them in fear, and the school backed them up and fired him from being a dean. Harvard University did that. So nothing is impossible at any university, and we have to fight it tooth and nail at the beginning before it spreads and becomes widespread around the world.
Well, and it's not just coming out of the universities. There's a lot of prominent Democrats who are calling, in tweets for similar sort of things. Bill Preskel, he's a New Jersey rep since '97. He's calling for the eventual prosecution of Donald Trump and his enablers for their many crimes against the United States. Of course, AOC has been tweeting about it. There's a whole list of them.
But let's not limit this to Democrats. If the shoe were on the other foot, if the Hillary Clinton had won the election, if there are Republicans who are yelling "lock her up" and who wanted to criminalize the sins of the Democrats. I worry about extremes on both sides. I have to tell you, I think the Republicans have done a better job in marginalizing their extremes than the Democrats have done. The Democrats have welcomed some of the extremists and mainstreamed them. The Republicans have done a better job in isolating them, particularly the bigots and the anti-Semites and the racists. So both parties have a little bit of cleaning up to do to make sure they marginalize the extremists. We are at bottom a center country. I love debating with centrist conservatives. Bill Buckley was a friend. We used to debate all the time on his show, and then we go out and have a beer. Today, that's impossible. You can't even talk to people. If I say something, Larry Tribe goes on his Twitter and calls me a shill or says I'm crazy or bonkers. And you can't have a conversation with people like that. They are the epitome of anti-intellectual and anti-diversity totalitarian minds. And they have to be exposed and they have to be responded to. I don't want to censor them. Let them tweet away. Let them make fools of themselves. But I want to call out the fact that there are people out there who are in high positions of academia. He's a university professor, and basically he cannot tolerate points of view different from his own.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We're going to have to wrap up, but I just want to ask, since you are a lifelong Democrat, why do you think the party isn't doing a better job at sort of disassociating or marginalizing itself from the AOC types?
Because they see it as their future. They see it as young people and people of color and people of different backgrounds. And last thing they want to do is alienate what could become their base. I think it's a good thing for America that Joe Biden got the nomination to become the candidate for the Democrats, because if he had been defeated, he would have been defeated by somebody from the hard left. And the Democrats showed that they are capable of moving toward the center, and I think they won the election because they moved to the center. If they had elected or nominated Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, I don't think they would have won the election. And I think AOC lost them votes in the House. And she is the great gift so far to the Republican and conservative movement. But she is emerging as more powerful within the Democrats. And so I worry very much about that development.
I understand. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Good night. And coming up after the break, despite the CDC telling all of us to stay home for Thanksgiving, Americans are on the move. But first, here's America Q&A.
Well, I hate to see the economy shut down. I'm glad they've got, they got things going with a new vaccine.
I think that the lockdown scenario is ridiculous. I think that people need to congregate rather than separate.
I think if the medical people think it's important, I think it's, I would do it.
I'm kind of on the fence about that. I think that they have to do what they deem necessary. So I'm proactive with the masks. So
I support a lockdown as long as there's some kind of financial aid from the government.
I think there's a reasonable balance to it. I'm definitely for listening to the experts, listening to the healthcare experts, the scientists, and trying to make a reasonable decision.
Didn't seem reasonable. You don't quarantine healthy people.
I think most countries are doing that right now. I believe Europe is already underway. I believe a lot of other countries are already starting partial shutdowns. I think a partial shutdown is probably going to be necessary.
I think it's a big mistake. I don't think it's effective, and I don't think it's necessary.
I believe that if everyone can wear a mask, practice social distancing, stay 6 feet apart, we will do better than being in lockdown.
I don't think it would be necessary if everybody would wear masks and observe the distance rules and everything, but people aren't going to do that. So if everybody did that, I think that we wouldn't have to have a lockdown. Hopefully we still won't have to have one.
Yeah.
Welcome back. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, recommended last week not to travel over Thanksgiving. but the TSA reports that screenings are its highest since the pandemic began at U.S. airports. And over the last 5 days, an average of nearly 1 million passengers per day have gone through TSA checkpoints. The last time that happened was March 15th. And a recent Gallup poll also discovered that 1/3 of Americans said they'd be very unlikely or somewhat unlikely to comply with another full lockdown. And that's about double the rate that we saw in the spring. So it seems that after 8 months, and despite the risks still being there, people are showing signs potentially of lockdown fatigue. To see if that is the case, we're joined tonight by Max Nelson, a policy director at the Freedom Foundation, and psychotherapist, Dr. Robi Ludwig. Welcome both.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right, well, we have an interesting discussion here. Where are people's minds at right now in terms of their sort of psychological health and their, I suppose, moral health or thoughts about all this? Dr. Robi, why don't we start with you? What do you think the impact is on this sort of prolonged lack of ability to have normal social relations?
Well, it's certainly having a ripple effect in terms of the patients that I see, in terms of families feeling stressed, a feeling of isolation and disconnection. And there is a lot of pandemic fatigue, which means that this has been going on for so long that people want to relax maybe some of the strict rules they imposed on themselves at the beginning of this pandemic.
And is that, is part of that the sense that nobody knows when it's going to end? I mean, we were told, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and that was 8 months ago. So is that part of it?
Yeah, that is part of it, that it's going on for a very prolonged period of time. Sometimes people feel like this won't impact them, and there's some denial. It can be extreme feelings of anxiety or depression or rage that get people to want to just follow what they want to do. It's very hard to adapt to ongoing changes, especially if you don't see it relating to you or if you don't know anyone who's been harmed by COVID. And there are a certain subset of people that enjoy the risk, that are willing to take the risk. But I think basically it's hard to adapt to these changes. They're not easy to comply with, to have a mask, wash your hands, keep social distancing. There are a lot of challenges, as well as we don't have the normal de-stressors available to us. We can't be with people. We can't socialize in quite the same way. We can't exercise in quite the same way. So it just makes life more challenging. And I think people want to regress and just make life easier for themselves.
And Max, I'd like to ask you, at the beginning, there were probably a certain subset of people that, didn't want to comply, but it seems that subset is growing. What do you think's going on socially there?
Well, we're an organization that's based out on the West Coast here, and we've seen a lot of unrest as most of our state governors have reimposed lockdown measures in recent weeks. And the Freedom Foundation's been taking the position that many of these gubernatorial edicts are overstepping. They're doing more harm than good in many cases. They lack legal authority. And certainly, as you mentioned a moment ago, it's having a tangible effect on people out here. Restaurant owners who are being told after surviving the first lockdown in the spring and limping along through the summer, now are being told you have to shut down again and just deal with it. People who are gym owners and small business owners across the West Coast are facing a lot of difficulty going back into a second round of lockdowns. And so, as we've staked out a position as a group that's willing to challenge some of this, we've seen an outpouring of interest and support from people who are fed up, who don't believe that these countermeasures are in their best interests or are grounded in science, and who object on various grounds. So we've seen a huge spike in interest in people on the West Coast who want to fight back.
So my next question is for both of you, from your perspectives. There's actually been a lot of backlash against governors and officials who are defying their own rules. We saw it happen with Governor Newsom in California. It happened with the New Jersey governor, and a few other cases too. How do you think that is impacting the general sort of social acceptance or mood around these things? Maybe Max, you can take that first.
Well, yeah, it's incredibly damaging, and it undermines the impression that public officials want to leave, that this is something to be taken seriously. And look, the virus is something to be taken seriously, and it is a real problem. And people should take reasonable methods to protect themselves and those they care about. But at the same time, we've seen, again, on the West Coast, these governors have taken very strong and draconian even measures to lock down our economy. And so people see that. They feel the suffering of the lockdown themselves personally. And at the same time, the government officials who are harming them and ending their business and eliminating the dreams that they've had for retirement or just a steady job to take care of your family, as people are seeing all of that and feeling all of that, they then watch their elected officials go have dinners with healthcare lobbyists at high-priced French restaurants, or take golfing trips to Hawaii. Even New York Governor Cuomo this week told the press he was planning on spending Thanksgiving with his 89-year-old grandmother, while at the same time telling New Yorkers they shouldn't be spending time with their families during the holidays. And that's just something that, hypocrisy is hard to take under any circumstances. When your business and your livelihood are on the line and have been destroyed by some of these edicts, it's incredibly hard for people to see their elected officials doing the exact opposite.
Yeah, and Governor Cuomo had to backpedal on that one and cancel his Thanksgiving plan.
I agree with that. I mean, when we see elected officials basically sending the message, do as I say and not as I do, it really can increase a feeling of rage and anger towards these officials, because we all want to spend time with our family. And do these elected officials have certain advantages that maybe the rest of the public doesn't have, like rapid testing or access to certain information that would help them feel more comfortable being with their relatives that are not available to the general public? It really just highlights how there are a different set of rules based on class and money and position. And when people are feeling stressed, isolated, worried about their businesses, really having an increased sense of loneliness and depression and anxiety, and they're told they can't be with family, or they fear that they will get their family sick, it just creates a lot of emotional, psychic issues for them. And it's really not a fair message to send. So we need to do definitely better in that regard.
And Max, from a legal or constitutional perspective, where is the line? I mean, emergency powers were one thing 8 months ago. Now, is it still the same? Do they have the right to make these sort of rules without legislative input?
Well, the governors are certainly acting like they do, and we're challenging that where we can and where we think it's appropriate. Each state has delegated emergency powers in different ways and under different circumstances to their governors, and so there's all sorts of new legal challenges, many of which we're involved with, again, here on the West Coast, that are testing the boundaries here. You know, these governors are trying to sideline as much as they can accountability from the state legislatures. Governor Inslee here in Washington State has effectively taken over the running of the state government, where in a normal year he would issue maybe a half a dozen or 7 gubernatorial proclamations. He's now said, triggered his emergency powers and has issued over 400. And he's regulating very personal and very detailed aspects of daily life. And at the same time, he's refused to bring the legislature back into session so that we could have a more informed and well-rounded debate and discussion over the best policy responses to these issues that are facing us. So certainly we think governors have overstepped their emergency powers. There are definitely constitutional implications. The unfortunate thing is so much of this is new territory, and it hasn't been litigated to as much as many other significant issues have, that some of these questions are fairly novel, and it's just going to take a while for them to work through the courts. But we are involved in challenging school closures, business closures, and even some mask mandates in court on some of these grounds.
Right, and Washington State, I think just yesterday, said no indoor gatherings at all. Is that right?
I believe it was not quite that strict, but almost. It may as well be. I believe it's limited at 6 individuals and no more than two families or 2 households gathering together. But yes, very, very strict limits up and down the West Coast. And of course, things are changing very rapidly.
Do you think this will ultimately go to the Supreme Court?
Well, some of these cases from around the country have already, on preliminary matters, reached the Supreme Court. I think certain of these cases definitely will reach the Supreme Court eventually. It's hard to predict the outcome of any particular case, but there's so much litigation going on and so many new emergency powers being tested and stretched by governors and state authorities. I have to imagine that some of these cases probably will reach the Supreme Court eventually.
So, Dr. Robi, most of this discussion is more about the civil liberties side of things. In terms of what you would say to the world about the psychological impact that you've seen on people, is the cure, better, worse than the disease, from your point of view?
It's such a good question. I think we all need to adapt and take control over what we can take control over. There is a pandemic out there. We need to understand the science, which is changing. We need to look at science that we can trust, like the CDC, hopefully is science that we can trust, and also connect purpose to why we're doing what we're doing. We're doing this for the greater good. We're doing this to protect ourselves and those that we love. And we need to make it easy for ourselves. Have masks available. Make sure you get in the habit of washing your hands and socially distancing, and realize that social distancing is not emotional distancing. Find other ways to feel connected, to understand your feelings and understand that it's okay to have a range of emotions. Have a support group available of people you can reach out to when you're feeling frustrated. And of course, under any psychologically difficult times in your life, it's good to make sure you're taking good self-care. So you want to make sure that you're eating right, you're exercising right, you're getting good sleep, that you find the silver lining in all of this, because there is a silver lining, and to have a sense of humor so that you can psychologically get those endorphins going and help yourself to feel better rather than worse.
All right, we have about 20 seconds left. What are each of you doing for Thanksgiving? Max?
I'm going to be enjoying it with my close family.
And Dr. Robi?
I'm not traveling. I'm just spending it with my family. I hope they won't get bored of me, but we'll try to be thankful for something.
All right. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all for tonight's show. Thank you so much for watching America is Talking. Join us again tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And from all of us here, good night.